Hello and welcome to the OutSystems YouTube channel. My name is Logan Brade. I'm a developer advocate here at OutSystems. This series is about taking your OS projects and incorporating it into a larger project and interfacing with different and interesting technologies. Not only to demonstrate just how flexible our low-code tech is, but to also break the stereotypes around OutSystems and show off just how creative you can be with our platform. In this episode, I'm going to be walking you through a passion project of mine and how I used OutSystems to solve it. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm a huge fan of creative tech, specifically robotics and animatronics used in storytelling for major theme parks and movies. This has led to me working on my own robotics projects and experimenting with microcontrollers, servo motors, and a software platform called Bottango to control my animatronics that I build. I recently built a new animatronic. His name is Captain Cogbrow. And I want to create an app where I can control his animations from a low-code web application developed using OutSystems. For this project, I will be interfacing my OS application to a REST API developed by Bottango and communicating to that API via secure tunnel setup through Ngrok. Now, if this all sounds foreign to you, don't worry, I'll walk you through what I'm doing. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into the project. So to fully understand what we're going to be doing, I think it's important to talk about the why. Bottango is a great application that allows me to program and store my animatronic projects in an easy way. The challenge is, at least as of this recording, is that I have to execute those animations in the Bottango software. This means that I have to have my computer pulled up, choose the animation that I want to play, then press play button on my laptop. However, I want to be a little bit more flexible in the ways that I choose the animation and start up the animatronic. In this case, I want to be able to run the animatronic via a web app on my phone, so I don't have to be tied to my laptop. However, in the future, because I'm using a web application, I can totally expand my OS app and make my animatronic smarter by responding to a multitude of external stimuli like voice controls or even AI to help extend the Bottango application. Now, one of the challenges that I face with this project is that the Bottango API runs locally on my laptop, and because of this, we need a way to securely connect to the API without allowing unwanted traffic. Plus, we need a way to bypass any CORS errors that we may face along the way. Now, there are numerous ways to do this, but I'm not really a networking guy, and I'm pretty sure no one wants to see me fumble my way through networking docs to figure it out. So I'm going to use Ngrok to make the secure connection and do it easily. Now that we have an understanding of the project, let's set up our project starting with Bottango. So now, as you can see here, I have Bottango pulled up, and this is Bottango Studio. And if you would like to learn more about Bottango and Bottango Studio, be sure to check out their web address here. Or if you're interested in Captain Cogbrow as a kit, you can also check him out there as well. I also have a build video on my personal YouTube channel if you want to see the process of how to put them together, if you want to create your own kit and start working with the Bottango software. But for this case, let's go ahead and start jumping into Bottango Studio. So we're going to go to a Captain Cogbrow kit. We're going to use the default kit just to kind of demonstrate how easy it is to connect to it. And we're going to set up a new project. And this does take a few minutes to actually open up. There we go. And as you can see, my animatronic's set up and is already connected, and it's already been previously calibrated. So in this project, you can see that I have all of the animations down here. This is predefined by Bottango. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that our servo motors and everything in this kit are actually properly connected. So we're going to go to the hardware section up top, and it looks like our drivers are all set up. So let's start turning on our individual servo motors. There we go. And then you can actually hear and probably see the servo motors responding. And we'll go back to animate and check to see if our project can actually run. There we go. And he seems to be moving and working with the software. So our next step, we'll go ahead and back that up. And what we need to do is we need to actually enable the API in Bottango, because this is not enabled by default. With this project, because of the way that it's set up, it's like a pre-built, predefined project. It's not a studio project. So I actually need to convert it to a studio project to turn on the API. So let's go ahead and convert it to studio project by going to build, and at the bottom right-hand corner, convert to studio project. Yep, you understand. This gets into more complex things with the Bottango software. It's not entirely necessary for you guys to know, but just to kind of demonstrate it, and we'll make sure that our project is still working. There we go. It's still responding the way that we need it to respond. And we're gonna go up back to our hardware section, click on that, and now you can see our hardware has actually changed. So at the bottom we have API control. So we're gonna go ahead and turn on API control and then take note of the port number. Now, as you're working with the API, you'll notice that the API might disconnect and you might have to reset it up. So just always keep track of this port number as you're working with it and getting it set up. So now that I have this configured, I'm gonna document this number, and then we're gonna go back to animate. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually open up Postman to see if we can connect to our API that way. I have Postman open, and this is where I should be able to test to see if my API is working. So as you can see, I have, in accordance with the Bottango documentation, I have a put request in where I'm calling to my local host because the API is running on my machine. It's on port 59224, and I'm hitting the playback state endpoint. And with that, I'm passing a few things in the body of the API call, and that is selected animation name. In this case, this is called The Ballad of Captain Cogbrow, which is the name of the animation itself. Is playing is basically going to be set to true because that's what's going to kick off the animation. And then you also have to select what playback time you want to start it at. In this case, I'm doing 1 millisecond because I want it to start at the very beginning. So let's go ahead and make sure that our API call is working and that Bottango is set up. So let's go ahead and click send. There we go. And now, as you can see, Captain Cogbrow is running and he's going through his animation that I have set up. So now the next thing that we need to do is that we need to go to Ngrok and we need to configure that so we can start making calls from outside of our network. So as you can see here, we're in Ngrok. Now, all you have to do is just set up an account and then go through the setup steps. It's really easy. I've already done it as a way to like test this to make sure that it's working. But the connecting steps for my Mac OS machine is super simple. Basically, I do brew install Ngrok, went through the configuration, and then you just deploy your app. Now with this, there are a couple of different things that you have to type into terminal to make this work just because of the way it's set up, and I will put it on the screen here so that you can see it. But what we need to do is we need to go to terminal. So as you can see, I have terminal open here, and this is the command that we're gonna pass to Ngrok to run that allows us to connect to Bottango on our system. Go ahead and copy and paste that in. So as you can see, it's the Ngrok command. We're gonna do HTTP, and it's gonna be our port number, which is 59224. We're gonna change the header to localhost 5922. This allows us, or 59224, because this allows us to route the request correctly. And then for the response header, we wanna add access control allow origin, and that star means all. And the reason why we're doing this is because if you don't do this, you will get CORS errors, or at least I did when I first set it up. I don't know if that's still the case anymore. And then we're gonna also add a response, add a second response header of just star. So let's go ahead and run that. And what this will do is this will allow all of the forwarding to work. Okay, so it looks like we're up and running. And the thing you want to look for is the forwarding web address. So as you can see, there's this long web address in Ngrok that is set up that is pointed to my local host and the port number. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this. And then I also already have a web address set up in order to communicate with Bottango. So let's go ahead and copy this in. And what we're going to do is we're going to test it in Postman to see if our request is getting properly routed to the animatronic. Okay, so we have Postman back up and open. And now what we need to do is we need to replace our localhost 59224 with the web address that was generated by Ngrok. So here we have it. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in. And it's going to replace the whole local host setup here. Oh, and actually we're going to replace the playback state as well because I already have this copied. So in this case, here is the new web address right here with our Ngrok app. We're going to hit playback state, which is the original endpoint, but we are going to add one thing to our query parameter, and that is ngrok skip browser warning equals true. So what happens is in ngrok, if you don't pass this command, it actually will have like a little warning pop up, and it'll actually stall the request from happening. So by doing this skip browser warning, it basically tells ngrok like, hey, don't give me the browser warning of like what I'm connecting to. I'm sure there's a reason why this exists. I don't need it for my particular project, but be sure to read the documentation in Ngrok just to make sure that it fits your use case if you're doing something different with it. But let's go ahead and send this request to see if it communicates with our animatronic. There it is. So as you can see, we are now taking our request, sending it to Ngrok, and it's routing the request back to our local machine to run our animatronic. So now let's go ahead and go into OutSystems and Service Studio and start creating our application that'll communicate with this API. Okay, so now as you can see, we are in Service Studio. And the first thing we need to do is in Service Studio is actually create a new application. So we'll click New Application. And we're gonna just create an application from scratch. This is gonna be a very basic application, but we are gonna do some little more complex things than what you would do in a normal OutSystems application. We're gonna select a reactive web app, and we are going to put in our app's basic info. In this case, I'm gonna call this application Captain Cogbrow. We're not gonna do anything super complicated there. I'm just gonna keep the description blank because I know what this is for, but be sure to always put in descriptions if you're creating a lot of applications, if you lose track or anything like that. And now what we're gonna do is it's gonna bring us to this screen and we're gonna create a module. So let's create our module. And now let's start with setting up maybe a basic screen with a play button. So let me go ahead and drag this screen over. And we're gonna do an empty screen. And then we're gonna take a button, drag it over to our empty screen, and we're just gonna call it a play button for now. Nothing complicated. But with our screen set up, now we need to be able to actually communicate with the API from Bottango and using the secure tunnel with Ngrok. So we're gonna go to our logic tab in Service Studio. We're gonna go to the REST API, or REST section, and we're going to consume a REST API. In this case, we're not adding multiple methods. Bottango does have multiple methods, but we're just really going to care about the play animation one for now. So we'll add a single method, and then you will get this consume single API screen. So now we need to start formulating our request. So we're going to change this get request to a put request, and then we're going to go back to Postman, and then we're going to select our URL here. And then go back to Service Studio, put in our Ngrok URL, and then we also need to change the request. So we'll go back to Postman and we will put in the details of our request. Go back to Service Studio. And in this case, of course, it's gonna be our selected animation name, which is the Ballad of Captain Cogbrow. Is playing is going to be true, and then our playback time in milliseconds is going to be 1. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and test our API to make sure that it's actually communicating with Bottango through Ngrok to see if it's working. So let's test it. There we go. And as you can see, our animatronic is running, but let me go ahead and pause that because I don't need him to run through all of that. We'll go ahead and go back to Service Studio. And now that we've tested it, let's go ahead and go back to the body. Oh, actually, before I continue, if you've seen my previous video on communicating with REST APIs, you're gonna see something a little different here. So normally what we would do with most REST APIs is copy to response body, but as you can see, this is grayed out. And this is grayed out for a very specific reason with the Bottango API. So the Bottango API is still currently under development. So there is, when you communicate with the API, OutSystems looks for, or Service Studio looks for a very specific response to our request. And basically Bottango is not returning the request in a way that it is like it wants it to. So it doesn't know what to do with this response, essentially. So we have to kind of set things up manually, whereas like Service Studio would generally do this, automatically make it happen for you and make it really easy. We just have to do it manually, which isn't crazy difficult. So we're just gonna go to the body. And then as you can see in our response here, there's kind of a default value. I'm just gonna put in a space and click finish. And it's gonna be weird because basically there is no response that happens with Bottango. But what this will do is this will make sure that we can actually appropriately call and make everything set up with our API. Once that is set up in place, we need to actually make the data structure for the Bottango API available to our application. So we have to go to the data tab here. And in our data tab, you're gonna see we have this dropdown called structures. We click on that, and then you'll see our API request. We'll click on that, and then we'll see our whole put playback state request data structure. And what we need to do is we need to click on put playback state request, and we need to change it from public, from no to yes. And what this will do is this will open up and allow me to go back to our interface where our screen is. And now we can actually create a local variable with our data structure. So let's add our local variable. I'm going to call this parameters because that's essentially what it is. It's parameters for our API. So we'll click on that and we'll change the data type. And we're going to scroll all the way down to our data structures. And we're going to try to find our request here. Yeah, here it is. Put playback state request. There it is. And let's see if it's still going to give us an error or if it's going to clear it. Oh, we actually have to get in and start assigning our parameters here. So the way I'm going to do this, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can set up default values, but I think what I'll do is I'm going to assign it in our client actions. So let's go ahead and do it this way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on our button here. So we're going to click on the button. We're going to go down to events and the options set up for our button. And there's this on click setup. We're going to click the drop down for on click. And we are going to create a new client action. So we'll create that. And as you can see, it'll create this play on click client action. And at this point, it's empty. What we're going to do is we need to change the parameters of our variable when we click our button. So I'm going to assign our variable here. And what this will do is I'm just going to call this params as a way to know that this is going to be updating the parameters. And then we're going to go through and make all of our assignments. So it's parameters dot, and it's going to be selected animation name. And what we're going to change it to is, it should be the ballad of Captain Cogbrow. Hopefully I don't make any mistakes there. We will see if I make mistakes when I try to run this. We're going to, oh good. Now it's actually popping up with suggestions. Now it knows what I'm trying to do. We're going to do parameters is playing, and this is going to be true. And then this one, we're going to change to parameters and playback time in milliseconds, and that's going to be 1. I'm going to see if this works. I believe that there's something with the API where I have to actually adjust the Boolean and make it a string instead, but we're going to try this and see if it works. Now with that set up, we're going to go to our logic tab, and now we're going to go to our put playback state API call, and we're going to drag that into our client action. And as you can see, we're going to get an error message here. So what we need to do is we need to change the request. It needs to know what data we're sending to the API, and that is going to be our parameters variable. And now, as you can see, that is set up. So let's go ahead and try running our application to see if it can actually communicate with Bottango. So I'm going to click publish. And now this will take a few minutes to actually set up because this is the first time that I'm running this application. It has to go through, spin it up on our environments, and it will take a few minutes. Okay, so our application is now set up and deployed. Let's go ahead and open it up in the browser. Okay, so now we're in our application. Let's see if this will play. Cool. So now our application, our OutSystems, our O11 application is communicating with Captain Cogbrow and Bottango through Ngrok. Now let's try to do something a little bit different here. So this is actually spun up in my personal environment. Before this runs any further, let me pause it. And this should get to it on my cell phone. Okay, and here is my web application on my cell phone. Let's see if I can run it. Yes, there it is. So now I no longer have to be tied to my laptop and play it in Bottango. That is so, so cool. And I'm so excited I got to do that. Okay, so I don't want to leave this project here. Let's go ahead and kind of up the ante a little bit and do something a little bit different. So one of the cool features with Bottango is that you can actually do live input control of your animatronics in robotics. So what I found out is that this is actually accessible via an API, a REST API endpoint. So what I want to try to do is connect my web application to the live input control of Bottango and control it live with my web application. So as you can see, I'm in the Bottango software suite. And so what we need to do is we need to actually set up a live input control scheme. So in the bottom right-hand corner over here, I have live input control scheme. We're gonna click on this little cog over here. And what we'll do is add a control. And now we need to actually add the thing that we want to control. In this case, it's gonna be the jaw. And it's kind of hard to click on this because there's a whole section over here, but I'm gonna try my best. There we go. And then we need to select our desired input. And as you can see, there's multiple ways to do live input control with this, but in this case, we're gonna use the REST API. So click on that. And then what we need to do is we need to actually change the identifier. This identifier is super important because this is how we're actually going to identify what part we want to do the live input control for. So I'm going to change it to mouth controller. There we go. And then smoothing isn't super vital here. It's just essentially smooths out the animations of the servo motors. In this case, we don't need to do it because I'm not doing anything crazy. This is just, for example, but if you find that the animations are harsh, you probably want to put in, the smoothing on to smooth them out. So go ahead and click done. And now let's test out to see if this is working correctly. It looks like our API is still set up. The joint, this is the jaw joint. So we are going to, we need to create a new animation because we want to be able to record the animation in a new animation file. So we're not overwriting our base animations here. And so this animation, I'm just going to call mouth. And this is also important because we want to make sure that we're identifying the right recording when we make the API call later. Okay, so let me go ahead. I have 2 API calls already set up in Postman to test it out. And let's try to get this to work. So here we have our first API call, which is going to be the playback state. And as you can see, I have 2 things in the JSON body. It's selected animation name, in this case, mouth, because that's the file that we're writing to. And we want to set is recording to true. And when we run this, you'll see in Bottango that it actually puts a little recording animation here at the bottom. Now I'm not doing anything, so it's going to be an empty animation. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and stop it. And via the API call, what makes this really nice is that you can actually just send the same thing, but false, and it'll actually stop the recording. We'll clear this out. And now it actually identifies, as you can see, our jaw joint that's moving. So what I want to try to do is I'm going to play around with the rotation of this servo motor. Do 1, so 1 is closed, and then 0 is fully open. Now there's kind of a quirk with servo motors that I don't really want to get into here because it's a little outside of software, more into hardware land. But the servo motors don't actually rotate a full 360 degrees. There's actually a degree limitation. And so when you set it to open and close, it's basically going to the full boundaries of the rotation of that servo motor. And then they're also kind of pre-configured for this project. So I'm sure it's not using the full rotation necessarily of that servo motor, but we just need to know this for when we're trying to do live input control because we don't want to try to over rotate the servo motor thinking it's going to go farther than what it actually is. Now that we have this set up, we need to actually send an API call to the live input controller. In this case, the mouth controller. So we have this API call that's here, and in this case, it's gonna go to our control input endpoint, and then we need to send it two things. We need to send it an identifier, in this case, mouth controller, because that's what we called our live input scheme, and then a value. And this value is actually gonna be a float. So it's gonna be anywhere from 0.0 to 1.0. And that kind of goes back to the rotation of the servo motors. You're basically just telling it what point you want it to go to and where you want it to stop at. So in order to actually move it, you have to start the recording. We do the rotation of the servo motors, and then we have to stop the recording to get it all set up. So I'm gonna make these API calls right now. So first one, we're gonna do playback state for true. There we go. Now, as you can see, it's recording. Now we're gonna send it a command, it closes. We're gonna send it an updated command, open. Then we're gonna send another command of close. There we go. And then we just need to stop the animation or the recording. Oh, missed it. Oh, anyways, it still picked it up. So let's go ahead and see if it picked up our animation here. So there we go. It is open, closed, open, and then closed. So we're good there. But what that means is that we're actually doing live input control via the REST API. So we know that those are connected, and now we just need to actually set up our web application to do the same. So we're gonna go back to Service Studio. And right now we just have our play button. So I'm gonna try to add something a little bit different here. So we'll add a label, and we'll change this to recording. And let's add our first button here. So we will do button, add it underneath, and we will change it to start. And now we need to actually set up our API call. So I'm gonna do things just slightly different. I'm going to go into the logic tab, and I'm gonna set up a new endpoint. So this is kind of where adding multiple methods makes a lot of sense. I'm not gonna add multiple methods just to kind of walk through each step of the process, but we will consume a REST API endpoint, add a single method, click continue. We wanna change the type of our request to a put request, and then we're gonna put in the details of our API call. So the URL is going to be the same as our first API call that we did in Service Studio, which is gonna be the playback state, but now we're gonna change the body of what's being sent. So in our request this time, the example selected animation name mouth, and then is recording is true. Let's test it to make sure that it is working. There we go. So now it's working. So that is going through a recording. We don't need to do anything else. And again, we're not going to copy to response body just because it's not sending the data that O11 is expecting. And so we're going to go back to the body. We're going to go to the response, and I'm just going to add a clear space so that it is text plain, so it knows exactly what we're doing. And now you can see we have a put playback state to API call. So now let's start connecting the dots to our start button. So we need to create an actual variable that's going to be passed to our API. So in our screen, I'm going to create a new local variable, and we're going to put this one to recording. And now we need to change the data type, and we want to change it to our data structure. Oh, actually, before I forget, we need to make this publicly available. So we want to go back to our data structures, click on the put playback state to request, and make it public. And let's see if it picked up for our recording data type. It might already be in here without having to make it public, but just for this example, I am making it public. Here it is, put playback state to request. So we'll do that. Now, as you can see, we have the two options, our selected animation name and is recording. And now it's giving us an error because it's not actually doing anything. So we need to start binding everything together. So we need to go to our button, our start recording button, and we need to go and create an on-click event, and we're gonna create a new client action. So this is our new client reaction for our button. our new client action. And let's go ahead and assign our variable here. So in this one, we'll do recording for our assignment for the label. And then in this case, we're going to take our recording variable and we're going to do dot selected animation name. And we're going to default this to mouth for the text. And then we need to do another variable. In this case, it's going to be our recording is recording, and then we're going to set this to true. So once we've assigned our recording variable, now we need to actually send that variable to the API. So we're going to go to put playback state 2. We're going to drag it into our client action. We're going to get our error because we need to put in the request, and we're going to go to the dropdown and add recording. And then we just need to publish our application because we're ready to test to see if recording is working. Okay, now let's go ahead and try our recording. There we go. So now if I open Bottango, that should be recording. Yes. So our recording button, start button is now working. But now we need to actually create a stop button to stop the animation when it's done. So let's go back to Service Studio and we need to go back to our interface, go back to our screen, and now let's create a stop button. There we go. So here is our stop button. And the good part is I believe we can actually overwrite our recording variable and then send to the same API endpoint because all we need to do is change our is recording to false. So let's create a new action, a new on-click event, and it'll be a new client action. Here we go. We will assign our variable. We'll call this recording. And then we will take our recording variable, recording dot selected animation name. And then we're going to change that. Or actually, we're not going to change it. We're going to keep it the same as before, but it's going to be a text. So that's still going to be mouth. And then we're going to change the next part. Our recording is recording, and then this is going to be false. Oh, silly me. I didn't actually create the API endpoint. So let's go ahead and add that in. So we will go back to our logic tab, add put playback state 2 into here, and then we will add our recording variable, and then we will republish it. Okay, fast forward. Figured out what was going on with this. So what I was running into was that the Bottango API wasn't recognizing the false Boolean. For whatever reason, it's thinking that it is text. So I just had to change. I created a new API endpoint where it's actually going to the same thing as what the second API endpoint that we set up was doing. But then I changed the is recording to a text data type. So then I passed false as an actual text string and it worked. Like I said, some of this is still under development, so sometimes like things aren't going to work the way that they need to. But now we can test it. I have the application open, stopping. Actually, pull it up. So we have our web app where you can start it and we can stop it. Let's go ahead and test it out. So I have this pulled open. We'll click start. We can see that it is going, and then when I click stop, it stops the actual recording. So now we need to create our open and close buttons to open it and close it while we're playing around in the application. We'll go back to Service Studio, go to interface, go to screen, and then let's add a new label. This one will be, we'll call it mouth. Let's add our first button. This will be open. And now that we have that, we need to add another API endpoint. So we're going to go back to logic. We're going to go to REST. We're going to go to consume REST API. We'll add a single method. Open that up, and then I will go to Postman because I already have this set up in Postman. And then we are going to change our method type. We're going to change it to put, and then put in our new API endpoint of control input. And then for the body, we want to put in our identifier information. So we're going to have our identifier, mouth controller, and then value. I'm just going to do 1.0 for now. We're going to test it. And we're just going to click test. It's not actually going to do anything because we're not running a recording, but we know that it's hitting the API endpoint. So we'll do a test later down the line to make sure that it's working. We'll go back to body, just do a space for our response. There we go. And so now we have our put control input API endpoint. So now let's go ahead and go back to our interface. Oh, actually we need to go to data because we need to change our data structures and make it available. Publicly available, yes. Now go back to our interface and now we will create a new variable. And this one we'll call it mouth open. And then we're going to change the data type and we're going to change it to what our data structure is that we just created. Put control input request. There we go. And so that has identifier and value. So now we need to start connecting the dots to our API. So we will go to our button and then we will click, or we will create a new on-click event and a new client action. We're going to do the same thing, assign a variable. This one will be called mouth open. And then we are going to assign our variable mouth open. And actually that has a suggestion already for us. And we're going to change the identifier. And the value is going to be, we got to change this to mouth controller. And then we will change the value to 0 is open. So it'll be 0.0. Oh, we're going to put that as string. There we go. And now we need to actually send that data to our API. So we're going to drag our put control input over to our client action. And then our request, make sure I have this right, is going to be mouth open, and that should clear it. And actually, before we test it, let's go ahead and try adding our mouth closed button too. So we will go back to our screen here and we will add a second button. Okay, and then we will add a new client action on our button. In this case, we're gonna assign, and then we're gonna try to overwrite the mouth open variable. Mouth open dot identifier. That is gonna be mouth controller, mouth open dot value, and then whatever the flip of that is, which I think was 1.0. And then we need to connect that to our API. So we'll put our put input control over here and then go back and add it to mouth open, and then let's publish. So let's open this in browser and see what we get. So we will start our recording, close, open. Okay, we're still getting an error here. So the error I'm getting is unprocessable entity. So let's find out where we made a mistake here. Okay, so I totally figured it out. So what was happening was for my assignment for mouth open and doing the like open on click client action, I was assigning mouth open.value to 0.0, and Service Studio does not like 0.0. So what I had to do was I assigned it to 0.1. So what that means is that it's not gonna like open up all the way, but I'm sure there's a way to work around it. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it as that. So let's go ahead and open up Bottango with our new application setup. So as you can see, I have my recording button, I have my stop button, I have the open and closed. And so now if I click start recording, open, we'll close it, we'll open it, we'll close it, we'll open it, we'll close it, and then we'll go ahead and stop it. And then we will run our animation. So if I go back over here, and as you can see, it stopped right about at this point. Go back, it'll then replay back the animation that we just did. So now the big thing is that we want to actually play this animation that we've now just created. And we don't currently have a play button for that. Well, I guess we do. So let's go ahead and reassign the play button that we created for the Ballad of Captain Cogbrow to play our custom animation that we're doing our live input control scheme for. So let's go back to Service Studio. And we will go back to our interface and we will change our play button and we'll change the params here. And instead of the Ballad of Captain Cogbrow, which is the whole first animation that I set up, we are going to change this to our mouth animation and open it up in the browser. And now we're going to go back to Bottango and let's go ahead and start our recording. So it'll start. We'll go ahead and close his mouth, open it. I'm just going to do this a few times just to clear out the other animation that's there. Because as you can see, I've kind of done several tests. And when you do stop recording for the animation, it keeps anything that's beyond that there. Cool. There we go. And then let's go ahead and click play. And it should play now the mouth animation that we just did our live input control for. And there you go. That is how you do live input control and set up a web application to Bottango. And see, it's just that easy to use O11 to communicate with my robotics project. It really didn't take that much time to do it. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a few weird configurations and things and steps that I had to go through to figure this out. But overall, this really only took me a few minutes to get my application working with my animatronic. And now, of course, I just want to say that this is just the beginning of a few crazy projects that we have in the pipeline for this year. We're doing a huge push to do more technical content so that you can create really cool projects like this on your own and for the organizations that you work for. Now, I could do my own outro, but I'm just going to go ahead and let Maxwell do it for me.
Hello, my name is Maxwell, and this is an AI-generated voice that has been integrated with an animatronic controlled by Bottango and was kicked off by an API call from an OutSystems app. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you in the next one.